Ukraine received more than $45 billion worth of military aid in 2025, marking the biggest influx in 4 years. Meanwhile, African countries say some of those weapons have ended up in the hands of militants that they've been fighting for decades in the region. That's led the Sahel countries to officially label Ukraine a terrorist state. RT correspondent Nalavuyo Kange recalls the signals being sent by African diplomats over the past year.
As Ukraine pleads for weapons, money and unconditional political backing from the West, a darker question lingers. Where are Ukrainian military capabilities actually being deployed, and who is paying the price? While Kyiv insists it is overstretched, under siege and fighting for survival at home, some African leaders say Ukraine still finds the capacity to project violence abroad through mercenaries, military expertise and weapons now appearing far from the Ukrainian front. Officials in Mali even say the war in Europe did not remain there. They say it leaked, it spread and embedded itself in the Sahel, one of the most terror-ravaged regions on earth. What Mali accuses Ukraine of is not diplomacy, it is not solidarity, but active involvement in a shadow war, one that blurs the lines between proxy conflict and terrorism, a war Africa says it did not ask for.
As remote as it may seem, the war in Ukraine and terrorism in the Sahel are connected. As a reminder, after the terrorist attack against a Malian Defense and Security Forces patrol from July 24-26, 2024 in the Kidal region, Mali had denounced this incident and condemned the attitude of Ukrainian officials who publicly claimed their participation in the said attack. A year later, the situation has escalated with the regime, and the Ukrainian regime has become one of the main suppliers of kamikaze drones to terrorist groups around the world. In this context, certain Western states must stop supplying arms to Ukraine, at the risk of contributing to the promotion of international terrorism. For others, including the French regime, nostalgic for colonization and concerned about its loss of influence in the Sahel, support for the Ukrainian regime is a maneuver to keep the international community's attention focused on the war in Ukraine, while sponsoring terrorist groups operating in the Sahel.
These are explosive accusations, but it's not just Mali. Sudan says Ukraine mercenaries were actively involved in fighting across the African continent.
Ukraine has been found to be involved in supporting other groups in Libya, Somalia and Niger. It supports organizations such as Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and also provides support to rapid support forces in Sudan by supplying them with drones at very low prices. Ukrainians began assisting this group approximately 7 to 8 months ago, teaching the militants how to use drones. Their intervention was motivated by the fact that it was difficult for the fighters to use such technology on their own, which highlights Ukraine's deep involvement in the Sudanese conflict, including the supply of drones and support for terrorism in both Sudan and Africa as a whole.
For the Sahel countries, accusations against Ukraine are inseparable from a broader reckoning with Western influence, coercion, and what they describe as a modern neo-colonial pressure, sanctions, diplomatic threats, political ultimatums, all, they argue, are designed to force African nations into alliances that do not serve their people.
For us, Ukraine is a terrorist state. Some countries are trying to force us to make a choice that does not suit us, using sanctions and unilateral coercive measures. They are trying to interfere in the internal affairs of our countries, and we are working with Russia to counter neo-colonial policies and control over our states by former colonial empires that want to force us to make economic choices that will not benefit our people.
Ukraine claims it faces an existential threat and relies on Western money and weapons, and yet Kyiv manages to deploy manpower, logistics and expertise thousands of kilometers away. It looks like some Western countries losing influence in Africa to Russia are willing to sacrifice more Ukrainians in battles away from home.
And we spoke with the Deputy Chairman of the Defence and Security Commission of Mali's National Transitional Council. He says the country has evidence clearly showing Kyiv's terrorist ties in the Sahel.
To this day, Ukraine, unfortunately, is actively trying to interfere with our fight against terrorists in the Sahel, providing them with logistical support and intelligence. We obtained evidence during combat operations. We managed to capture terrorist leaders from the Azawad Liberation Front and Islamic State. Even on their own websites, you can see terrorists with Ukrainian flags and Ukrainian instructors. So when we capture terrorists, they confirm that they are being trained by Ukrainians. There are currently many drone attacks, often targeting locations that can only be hit with confidential information. We suspect that the information from satellites is being transmitted by Western powers. That is, it is being transmitted to Ukraine, and Ukraine is using it to harm us through terrorists. The fact that terrorists have FPV drones and similar equipment confirms the presence of Ukrainian instructors. Most terrorists are former shepherds and peasants who did not attend school, and even if they did, their level of education is very low. They would not be able to use such technology on their own. Ukraine is very far from the Sahel countries. It is in a difficult situation and in a state of economic collapse, and we do not understand why it is helping terrorists. The only logical explanation is that Ukraine is following orders from either the United Kingdom or France. As you know, these two countries are the world's biggest supporters of terrorism.